Hello, everybody. The bloody war in Ukraine goes on. Vladimir Putin is hell bent on the devastation of Ukrainian cities and indifference to just how many Ukrainians he kills. Vladimir Zelensky seems now undecided as to what course to follow because each day brings more destruction and death to his country, his people, and any kind of peace agreement seems distant, remote, and perhaps impossible. And Western intelligence analysts say Putin himself is caught between a dramatically higher death count of Russian troops that is rising daily, while there are reports of dismay and unrest among the Russian people at home. A few military experts actually now claim that the Russians are unlikely to win their war against Ukraine. President Biden's phone call with China's Xi Jinping was unsuccessful. Senior officials say the Chinese president, in fact, told Biden to clean up his own mess, and there was no assurance forthcoming that China won't send military aid to Russia. Mr. Biden apparently warned Xi of serious consequences if he does. Welcome to the Great America Show, and thanks for being with us. This week, we also learned that President Donald Trump's Attorney General now admits he knew that Joe Biden was lying to the American people about his son Hunter's laptop during the 2020 presidential debate. Barr told Fox News that though he was very disturbed, as he put it, by those lies, he obviously wasn't disturbed enough to tell the American people before the election that the Democratic presidential candidate was a liar and very likely part of the biggest political scandal in American history. With us now, a man who was caught up in that scandal, a victim of the attempted overthrow of the presidency of Donald Trump, a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Army Lieutenant General retired, and former National Security Advisor under President Donald Trump. With us, General Michael Flynn. General Flynn, it's great to have you with us. Let's start with Ukraine and the mess that NATO in particular is in, and the inability of Zelensky to get a discussion face-to-face with Putin. Your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I don't think that Putin has any time for Zelensky, because I think he sees Zelensky as not only a puppet type a leader in the Ukraine, but also somebody who has admitted to things that over the last few years, admitted to things that we now know to be true. I mean, these various relationships with people in our that are relatives of our members of our administration, also some of the, I think, the nefarious activities that Ukraine has been involved in, from human trafficking, drug trafficking, money laundering. I mean, there's an awful lot. And I think that there has to be a reckoning by the leadership in the European Union, by the leadership of NATO, which are not both, they're not the same. They're not one and the same. And people need to understand that European Union and NATO are two different organizations. One is essentially a governmental organization for trade and economics, and one is a security organization, and that would be NATO. So I think that if anything, what the West should demand from Zelensky is that he sits down across the table from Putin as two leaders who are engaged in essentially a limited war, as I would describe it right now. For now, they need to sit down with each other and come to an agreement on how to end this thing and end it soon. I mean, I've written about this, Lou, recently, and one of the big issues on the table is neutrality. The neutrality of Ukraine from really what has been an encroachment by NATO since at least 1990, if not since 1994. Right. And one of the big issues, Lou, is what's called the Budapest Accords, right, which was in 1994, which was an agreement between France, England, the United States, and Russia at the time for no further encroachment against the Russian Federation. So there's a lot of of issues that play there, but those are the kinds of things that have to be discussed. If they're not, we're going to continue to see bloodshed in Ukraine, and the people of the Ukraine are going to continue to suffer.
10 million of them, according to the most recent estimate from the United Nations, have fled the country and are now refugees. A fourth of a country's population is just a tremendous number for refugees. Let's go to the point that you were making about some of the questions that surround Zelensky and Ukraine, its relationship to the West in a number of areas. When you say that President Putin has no time for Zelensky, and because Zelensky is a puppet, who's pulling the strings?
Well, I think that Zelensky is part of this effort, with this whole reset that we hear talked about by the organization described as the World Economic Forum. And when we think about how did Zelensky get into power? What kinds of things has he done while he's been in office? What have been who is behind really the kinds of activities? And this is really not a lick on the Ukrainian people, because the Ukrainian people are terrific people. I mean, I know some, I've met some, I've been in conversations with many when I was in my military days, where we had people across tables and having discussions and all that kind of stuff that you'd have. The people of Ukraine are terrific. The sad thing that you just mentioned, 25% of their population would be considered, being displaced or refugees. I mean, so really the masters right now, and when we think about Joe Biden and what Joe Biden did prior as a vice president under the Obama administration, and some of the things that they were involved in, some of the things that we know that others around his son, and then those that are part of that entire structure, that sort of quote unquote energy company, right? I mean, there's a lot of things here that we just don't know, and we don't totally understand nor appreciate. And these are the kinds of issues that have to be resolved. I mean,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, General.
No, I was just going to say that. I mean, there's such a lack of trust in any of the reporting that's coming out of the mainstream media, Lou, which you know quite a bit about, and also I try to follow other media outlets. Like I try to follow what the Indians are saying. Okay, the nation of India. I try to follow some of these other European outlets to get a sense of what are they saying, and balance everything. When you have China and India, okay, which represents about a third of the world's population, that are aligning themselves or staying out of this issue in Ukraine, and in a funny way, on behalf of China or on behalf of Russia, we've got a significant problem. And it seems to me like the nation of India, and I particularly pay attention to India, because India's Navy, a lot of people don't know, India's Navy was principally built by the Russian Federation. They're particularly their ships. So there's two nations, China and India, which represent about 3 billion people, right? There's let's just say there's 7, maybe 8 billion people on the planet. I mean, these countries are not jumping on the bandwagon of the West and calling Putin out. I mean, what they're saying is they are telling us that there's legitimate issues in play, and so let's resolve these issues that are in play, and I think that they can be resolved very, very quickly, very quickly. And I'm not saying that Ukraine cannot deal with the European Union, in terms of economic development and trade. They may not want to, because I can tell you that the European Union, and for the most part, and then definitely NATO, I know NATO even better, but the criteria and the conditions that they have to join those organizations are very, very high. They're stringent, and there can be no corruption. There can be no funny business inside of their governments, right? No dealing in sort of extra types of activities that are outside of what a normal government would do.
A cynic would say, General, that if they're going to be corrupt, they have to be very sophisticated about it.
Exactly.
And the Ukrainians are not. They are absolutely permeated with corruption. But on the other hand, so is the United States now, political corruption throughout our government, our federal government. And that plays a part too here. One of the issues that we have to examine in our national media, our corporate media, will not deal with it because the corporatists have so much money involved and a different interest. They are focused on a globalist future instead of specifically worrying about the nation, the national interest, and the national direction. And by that I mean, what is the relationship suddenly between Biden and Ukraine, Biden, and I'm talking about the Biden family as well as the president, and China. China actually put out a readout of that phone call last week with Xi before the United States government. Here is a communist totalitarian government putting out at least its interpretation as well as the readout of the discussion before the Biden White House could do it. This is wrong. And it is wrong for this president to simply go into the NATO meeting in Brussels and without any explanation about his vested interest and his son's vested interest in Ukraine and in China. Because now you have two strategic partners, China and Russia, and you make a terrific point. With India, a third of the world's population, and they're aligned. India desperately needs the weaponry, the advanced and sophisticated technology of Russia. It needs a coexistence with China, certainly. So those interests align against a bloc, NATO, the purpose of which was to stop war in Europe. And here we are with a war raging.
We're calling, well, if the crazy thing is that, and this is, and I'm speaking for myself, but having been in these various forums and work with these, with many of these countries and work with these organizations, we are in a place where NATO is acting in a very offensive way. NATO is supposed to be a defensive, if attacked, then one attack, then we're all attacked, and we will defend our sovereignty, right? But we're now acting in a very offensive way where you have different countries in NATO that are providing weapon systems and arms and ammunitions and propaganda and cyber and all these kinds of things. That these are very offensive things. All this crazy talk about providing a no-fly zone. We have to give them a no-fly zone, and we have Republican senators calling for it in the United States.
40 of them. 40 of them.
These are people that don't fully understand. They do not grasp, and I'm telling you, they do not grasp what it takes to stand up a no-fly zone. Because in order to stand up a no-fly zone, you have to have, absolute control of the air, and that means that you have to destroy anything that can range you from afar, right? Surface-to-air missiles is an example. So to get into the weeds and the tactics, those surface-to-air missiles can sit inside of Russia and knock out aircraft that are flying in this quote-unquote no-fly zone, right? So these are not simple, things, and they're simple to say. They are nearly impossible to execute without making huge errors, strategic errors. And so we're in this place right now where NATO is acting as a offensive, they're talking about offensive things. And so the interesting thing, and I think all your listeners need to really pay attention to this. I understand now that Biden is going to go over and be part of a NATO leadership meeting that they're going to have, probably because the previous representative that we sent, Kamala Harris, didn't do such a hot job. She couldn't even read her notes about what she was supposed to say about where Ukraine geographically stands in Europe. I mean, my God. So
Lord help us.
No kidding. I mean, these are big things. Now, the struggle in warfare, Lou, is that people make mistakes, and we see some of the rhetoric coming out of our own Defense Department about, well, if somebody uses chemicals, there's going to be a significant reaction to the use of chemicals, right? I mean, first of all, go ahead.
I've got to ask you, we're flying 90 sorties a day off our carriers in the Mediterranean over Eastern Europe, right up against the Ukrainian